Hi, I'm Davy. I'm awesome. Welcome to Davy's Awesome Wrestling, where I review wrestling related things, all from the perspective of a fan, not an insider. So this week I'm going to be reviewing a brand new docuseries on Netflix, one that I was highly debating whether or not I should review, but you know what? Let's get a fan's perspective on it. The new docuseries that recently came out on Netflix, Mr. McMahon. 6 episodes limited series, which they made clear. This is Vince McMahon being interviewed, which is rare. He doesn't do a lot of interviews about himself. And all of these interviews were done before the allegations came out last year. Actually, they were even done before the allegations came out a couple of years ago. But went into this documentary hoping that it would shed more light on the allegations. Let's see if it did. Episode 1, Junior. It starts with Vince McMahon's beginnings. Stuff if you're an avid wrestling fan like me, you've heard. How he didn't meet his dad, Vince McMahon Sr., until he was 12 years old. He was being raised poor in a trailer park with an abusive stepfather. And they alluded to later in the series maybe a sexually abusive mother, but he never really elaborated on it. But from then, getting into the business, his dad starting him out small, them not really having much of a relationship outside of business, until he eventually bought out his dad and his dad didn't want to sell it to him, basically set him up for failure and he succeeded anyway. But as soon as the business was officially his, he started doing things that his dad did not like going into the other territories. This was back in the day when wrestling was all regional stuff. You were on a channel that only went out so far. You only promoted in certain areas and you didn't cross the line into somebody else's territory, and Vince McMahon said, screw that. Which needed to happen, you know, especially with cable television coming out. There was now national broadcasting going on. Basically, now we could be watching the same thing in New York and California. Eventually wrestling was going to have to change. And it goes into him wanting to make a new star, but not really focusing on what they could do in the ring, but really the charisma, the star power, i.e. Hulk Hogan, who is a big part of this docuseries and, well, kind of sheds him in a little bit of a new light. But it also goes into the story of him creating the first WrestleMania, and WrestleManias after that, and then ends with, you know, John Stossel and Richard Belzer and how they were basically trying to expose the business with their interviews, and both got hurt for that, and both sued for getting hurt for that. Basically, again, this is nothing we haven't heard before. Episode 2, Heat. I will say I was very happy that it started with Vince McMahon singing Stand Back. But then it went into, like, some of the stuff that we've heard. And again, I was hoping they were going to elaborate on it a little bit. Like Jesse Ventura trying to start a wrestlers union. They went a little bit into it about how he was trying to gather the wrestlers, get a meeting together, and they were going to basically threaten to leave or they get a wrestlers union, which back at that time they really needed. But Hulk Hogan admitting he ratted Jesse Ventura out. Making me wonder now that he's admitting it, how much heat Hogan's going to get from all other wrestlers. And Vince McMahon saying he didn't know about it at all, but several people saying that he basically came up to each one of them individually and said, if you show up at that meeting, you're fired. And it went into WrestleMania 3 and the whole Andre Hogan match. It went into him trying to keep Hogan saying that he wanted to go make movies, so they decided to make a movie themselves. A movie written by Hogan and Vince McMahon. No holds barred. Which is why they are wrestlers and wrestling promoters, not script writers. But eventually Hogan getting passe, fans getting tired of him, and around that time, the big steroid scandal, when Vince McMahon went on trial being investigated by the federal government for distributing steroids among his wrestlers, which he said he did not do. And I will say this, in this interview, so many wrestlers, even the ones that have no reason to like Vince McMahon right now and no reason to care if he likes them right now, admitting no, he did not make us do steroids. He never forced us to do steroids. He never said we should do steroids. He may have known about it, but it was legal back then, so he didn't say anything. Basically, he'd tell people, yeah, maybe you need to bulk up, but that doesn't mean go inject yourself. But then it also went into the Ring Boy scandal about the announcer who was molesting the younger boys that were getting jobs in WWE, setting up the ring and stuff. And Pat Patterson, where it shed a little bit of light on that, because for years we've been under the impression that no, Pat Patterson did not sexually harass anybody, but Tony Atlas saying that he did. But who were they going to complain to? He was Vince's number 2. And it goes into Rita, the female referee, the very first female referee, who eventually left and filed a lawsuit against McMahon and WWE saying she was sexually harassed and assaulted. and how eventually that got settled out of court. And then ended with Hogan leaving WWE under the grounds of, don't worry, I will never compete against you, I just want to go pursue acting, but then going to WCW. Number 3, Screwjob. And again, it opened with one I was really hoping they would elaborate on, the Wendy Richter Screwjob. We've heard the story mostly only from Wendy Richter, so I was kind of excited that we were going to get Vince McMahon's perspective, and we did a little bit, but it was very quick. Him saying that she was refusing to drop the belt. She's always maintained that it wasn't about the belt, it was about how she felt that the women wrestlers were severely underpaid versus the male wrestlers. And I was just kind of hoping they were going to get more into that, but Vince not even addressing that, just saying he wanted her to lose the belt and she wouldn't, so he had the referee do a fast count. But this was just the first couple of minutes of this episode, and that was it. So I was a little disappointed, because even with Wendy Richter and telling her story, really only gotten little tiny bits. There's more to this story I'd like to hear. But then goes into WCW competing, and it mentions the curtain call, and then ends with their stories of the Montreal Screwjob. Which I wasn't that into this episode because again, it started with something that I was like, oh great, I would love to know more about this, but then really didn't give us anything more about it. And then WCW competing and the curtain call and the Screwjob, I could have just went and watched the Monday Night Wars documentary to get all this story. Montreal Screwjob, I don't have to watch the Monday Night Wars. I can read Bret Hart's book, watch Bret Hart's DVD, watch WWE Rivals, watch Dark Side of the Ring. I'm not trying to be mean, but I'm getting a little sick and tired of them talking about the Screwjob. We know. The last 5-6 documentaries about the Screwjob really haven't told us anything new about the Montreal Screwjob. Episode 4, Attitude. It picks up with the last episode of the Montreal Screwjob and Vince McMahon turning that negative into a positive by making himself the biggest heel in the company and creating the Attitude Era, basically by becoming the Mr. McMahon character, which they did ask him in the documentary how much of the Vince McMahon character is like the real Vince McMahon, and he said it's nothing alike, but every wrestler going it's a lot like him. Even had Stone Cold Steve Austin on there elaborating that the best characters in wrestling are really themselves with the volume turned all the way up. Basically just exaggerated versions of themselves. And then it goes into him creating The Rock out of Rocky Maivia, and it ends with the death of Owen Hart, and him elaborating that it was just an accident. Bret Hart wondering if it wasn't an accident. Even saying that the stuff Owen was doing before his death, he felt was his way of punishing Bret Hart. And I will say this, I did like when Vince McMahon said this. He said if Bret Hart really thinks that I was trying to make Owen look stupid just to punish Bret Hart, then that's his own ego. Even back in the day when I read Bret Hart's book and he said stuff like that, I was like, dude, come on. He's gonna sabotage one of the best wrestlers he's got just to get at you. No. They were just trying to find something that worked for him. Not to mention, there's many accounts of Owen not liking a lot of stuff going on and not wanting to do that stuff like the Attitude Era, just wanted to basically do stuff that he could be proud of. But then going into the accident and making it clear it was an accident. In fact, they sued the people that rigged Owen Hart for giving him a faulty vest that they knew was faulty. And he explained why he continued the show, because that's all he knew to do. Said if it was him or if it was Shane, he would want them to continue the show because that's what he is. He's a promoter. I still don't agree with them continuing the show, but for years I've talked about, to me, the whole we didn't know what else to do, all I could say to that is fair enough. Episode 5, Family Business, where it did kind of get into some stuff that we haven't really touched much on before. His working relationship with his family, particularly Stephanie McMahon and Shane McMahon. I mean, it also had some side stuff about buying WCW, which again, the Monday Night Wars documentary got all that. It went into Vince McMahon trying to do XFL, which was a disaster. As much as he may have liked it, it was like you were trying to combine wrestling and football. It doesn't work. Losing the WWF name to the World Wildlife Fund, but just going with WWE. Bringing back Hogan, bringing in Eric Bischoff, because basically that was always Vince. He doesn't care how personal it ever got. It's about business. Which was one thing that they were going through in this entire docuseries that was very clear, that Vince McMahon is all about business. Business, business, business. Doesn't care what you said about him, doesn't care what you did to him. If he can make money off of you, he's going to bring it back. But we already kind of know that, because we've seen situations where we were like, that guy's never going back to WWE. He crossed that line so bad. and he's back in WWE. It also goes into them bringing in John Cena and making him a big star, but again, this was more focusing on his relationship with Stephanie and Shane. Shane wanting to be the one to take the reins and run the family business, but Vince basically making it clear, like, it's not happening, not as long as I'm alive. It's my company, I'm running it. You're going to have to force me out like I did my dad. And instead of doing that, Shane leaves. Which brings us to the final episode, the finish, where it started with things like Chris Benoit. Again, not trying to be mean, but there's really nothing new to bring to that table. We've seen so many documentaries about it. And how they started going into PG, and how in the midst, again, of tragedy with Chris Benoit, the way it worked out is they were able to make a way to better take care of the wrestlers, while at the same time making things better for them. Goes into Shane coming back, and people basically saying that Vince McMahon will never retire, no matter how old he gets. And I think that's where they originally were going to end the series. But then 2022, when the allegations started coming out. It then stated in this documentary that all these interviews had taken place in late 2021, and then after the allegations, Vince McMahon was supposed to come back and do some more interviews, but canceled them. And basically after the first set of allegations, Vince McMahon retired from WWE. Then he came back. And that's when they sold the company to Endeavor, which owns UFC and has now formed TKO, and they own WWE. And when Vince McMahon first left, Stephanie McMahon was very gracious about it, saying, let's go Vince. But when he came back, she suddenly resigns. And they couldn't really go much into that. Stephanie wouldn't talk about that. Vince wouldn't talk about that. And everybody else is saying, you don't know the situation of why she left, so let it go. Bruce Pritchard, who'd been interviewed throughout this, he had come back to do some more interviews, and he defended Vince McMahon. They let him see the first couple episodes of this docuseries, and he didn't like them. He felt that they were just attacking Vince McMahon, and went into how Vince McMahon has a human side, and a very good human side, and, telling a story about how Vince McMahon made sure Bruce Pritchard's wife got the best care when she got cancer, and they were telling her best case scenario, you have 4 years to live, and that was 24 years ago. Then it goes into the allegations that came out earlier this year, in January, the Janelle Grant allegations, saying that not only was he having an affair with her, not only was he giving her hush money, but he was sex trafficking her. And how she's now filed a suit, and because of this, now Vince McMahon does not own WWE anymore. He had sold it to Endeavor. He still had majority shares in stock, but basically was forced out. So he's now retired. Which funny thing about that is before they went into the whole him selling stuff and saying he would never retire, saying WWE probably wouldn't last long without him. And now it's bigger than ever, actually. Triple H running creative. Stephanie McMahon hasn't come back. And in my opinion, I remember the first time Vince McMahon retired, and I was happy about that because it had been going downhill. This was obviously somebody who had lost his touch. My feelings on the documentary itself, it was good, but it did not give us the insight we were looking for. In the stories that I feel like we wanted insight on, it kind of dropped the ball. It's going way into stuff like the Montreal Screwjob and the competing with WCW and buying WCW, but how many more documentaries do we need of that? We know. Nothing new was brought to that table, so it was really just like watching stuff I've watched over and over again. What I had been waiting for, which we finally got in the last episode, is as a fan, I was hoping to get some elaboration on the accusations that have been going on the last year or two. And honestly, I will say this, didn't get them. Didn't get the elaboration. Just got the same stuff I've been hearing for the last several months. It had people coming in bashing Vince McMahon, it had people defending Vince McMahon, which is where I feel that Bruce Pritchard is wrong. He's saying that this documentary only presented him as an evil a-hole. I think it showed his human side. I think it showed times where he cared and times where he was human and times where, yeah, he made mistakes and he was flawed. But does that stuff make up for the allegations coming out? No. Even for a Bruce Pritchard situation where he's talking about his wife is still alive 24 years later thanks to Vince McMahon. I'm glad that happened for you. But does that caring act make up for the stuff that Janelle Grant is saying he did if he did in fact do these things? No. And with the allegations that have come out about him throughout the years, it's a little hard to say that I don't think there's merit to these allegations. Ultimately, I found this docuseries disappointing because for months they've been building it up as the kind of thing that was going to give us some definitive answers, some final answers, and really we just have the same exact questions with no answers. I'm not saying we're owed that, but I'm saying in this case, the documentary, that's kind of what they were advertising and they didn't deliver. As far as what a lot of people are saying, that it was unfair, it only presented him as a jerk, I don't feel that that's true. I don't think it only presented him as a jerk. To me, in my opinion, watching the documentary and how they handled things, it just kind of did that thing where it presented it and you made your own opinion. And if the majority opinion is that he's a jerk, but again, I already believed he was a jerk. So on that note, would I recommend you check out the Mr. McMahon docuseries? Sure. So there you have it. That's my wrestling review this week. Hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you did, make sure to hit like, hit subscribe, hit the little bell so you get notifications when I post videos. I'll leave a comment I can respond to in my next comment corner. If you saw the Mr. McMahon docuseries, tell me what you thought of it. If you really think it's one-sided, go ahead and tell me why you think it's one-sided. Love you guys.